Treatment complications across the U.S. as cancer centers say that there is a chemotherapy shortage, forcing doctors to switch medications and in some cases halt treatment. Joining us now, CNBC contributor and former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He also serves on the boards of Pfizer and Illumina. How widespread is this? Which compounds are we talking about, Doctor, primarily?
Well, right now we're talking about chemotherapeutics primarily and platinum-based chemotherapeutics. That's the most immediate issue because a plant that produced a lot of those drugs in India, Intes Pharmaceuticals, was shut down as a result of an inspection by FDA that found systemic problems with their manufacturing process and data integrity issues. But this is a multi-decade problem. I remember this problem when I was back at FDA in 2003. There were shortages of chemotherapeutics at that time. When I was there in 2019, we had shortages of IV drugs like morphine, things used for anesthesia. So the issue really relates to injectable generic drugs, sterile injectable generic drugs. And the problem is that manufacturing the reimbursement has been driven down to the cost of manufacturing effectively. And that works fine when you're dealing with small molecules, pill-based drugs, which aren't that complex to manufacture. But when you're talking about sterile injectable drugs that are hard to manufacture, where things can go wrong, and you're paying a margin slightly above the cost of manufacturing, it drives consolidation, it drives offshoring, and it leads to problems. Companies are unable to invest in manufacturing plants and keep them state-of-the-art. And so when you get a shutdown, it leads to these kinds of distributed effects because the manufacturing has become so consolidated and much of it's offshore.
And why wouldn't it lead to with all the cost cutting and pressure on margins, why wouldn't it lead to some type of shortcuts or not adhering to best manufacturing processes, especially in countries where we know nothing about the regulatory agencies?
Well, that's what's happening. FDA has increased regulation, oversight of these drugs in recent years, requiring manufacturers to do more to make sure that these sterile facilities are state-of-the-art. That costs money, and the margin just isn't there to provide for that. So you've seen companies get out of this space. Teva announced that they were cutting generics out of their pipeline. Another company, Lynette, also restructured, cut back on their manufacturing in recent months. And so you've seen companies get out. The average generic manufacturer loses money on about 50% of their portfolio. So a lot of these are money-losing drugs. It's fine when it comes to pills again, but when it comes to these injectable sterile drugs, we're going to have to find a way to pay more if we want to have reliable manufacturing. And right now, the White House wants more regulation. The industry wants subsidies. I think if we're going to get to a solution, we're going to have to find a way to pay for quality and reliable manufacturing, and perhaps it's some kind of third-party certification that if a manufacturer can make representations that they have state-of-the-art manufacturing and they've invested in that and they have reliable manufacturing, they would be paid more under Medicare. This is really a reimbursement under government programs problem, and the Inflation Reduction Act is going to make it worse because it prevents these manufacturers, these generic companies, from taking price increases to offset the costs of reinvestment in their facilities. It also lowers the cost of these drugs, and so you're going to see fewer manufacturers getting into these generic spaces just because more of them are going to be price controlled now.
Is it at this point, Scott, are we making any headway in targeted therapeutics? What's the percentage of chemo? Has it declined at all? It'd be nice to never use chemo if you could have targeted therapies because it's such a, kind of a blunt force tool that it hurts normal cells as well, right? That's the best we can do, and it works in a replicative phase of it works during mitosis. So hopefully it gets cancer cells, but it also hurts normal cells as well. That's why you get so sick.
Yeah, look, you see a lot of the targeted drugs being used for secondary prevention and also for long-term maintenance in patients who have been diagnosed with cancer and successfully treated with upfront regimens. The reality is that these chemotherapeutics are still the backbone of a lot of frontline regimens, even though those regimens also include targeted therapies. That's becoming less and less common, but not that quickly. These platinum-based drugs, for example, the ones that are in shortage, are still the backbone of many, many important regimens. But it's not just chemotherapeutics. We're going to see this is a cyclical problem. It's chemotherapeutics today. It's going to be 2 years from now. We'll be talking about IV morphine. Then we'll be talking about IV antibiotics. This has been going on for at least 20 years that I've been around the FDA. We haven't solved it. These problems have only gotten worse over time. It's a structural problem in the marketplace, and we just haven't done what we need to do to solve it, which is pay for quality.
And the government responding to cost pressures in many cases makes it worse.
That's right. I mean, many drugs are priced too high, but there are also drugs that are priced too low, particularly these sterile generic drugs.
Right.